Yes, yes. Oh, man. My God. What a story. What a story today. What a story today. In the bushland of Fort Bragg in North Carolina, a deer hunter makes a disturbing discovery. A matte black Chevy Colorado with giant off-road wheels is stuck in a ditch. There's no one around, and it is a very odd sight to see a vehicle like this sort of half on the road and half in the ditch, because it can easily just reverse out of it. So the deer hunter's looking at this, wondering what's going on. As the hunter is approaching closer to the vehicle, he can see some shell casings on the ground, like somebody had been firing a weapon nearby. As he's scanning the area, that's when he sees it. Laying on the ground beside the truck is the dead body of a very large black man. And the hunter can see that he's already dead, so he immediately calls 911. Given the fact that the bushland is owned by the United States government, the military, as soon as the hunter told the 911 dispatcher where the body was located, the military were notified. And within the hour, the military had swarmed the entire area, cordoning it off. This bushland in Fort Bragg is sectioned off, so there are parts that are strictly for the military to perform their exercises, and there are other parts of the bush that are for basically anybody. The general public can go in there and they can hunt and do stuff like that. Where this body was found was in the section that is open to the public. And detectives straight away can see that the man on the ground has a bullet hole in the temple of his head. As they go through his pockets, they find his ID. It's a 44-year-old man named Timothy Dumas. Timothy was a retired veteran, having served 20 years in the United States Army. And since his retirement in 2016, he had multiple run-ins with the law. He owned a nightclub where he was fined for serving underage kids alcohol. He was also charged with avoiding the state taxes on liquor. He had been investigated for drug dealing and having multiple incidences of firing a weapon in public. One of these incidences was reported to be in a house that he rented out to people, with the projectile going through the wall and nearly hitting a neighbor's toddler. So at this stage, it's December 1st, 2020. It's pretty obvious that Timothy is now a career criminal. Timothy had joined the army in 1996 and did 4 tours of Afghanistan. He rose to the rank of chief warrant officer before his retirement in 2016. He would be awarded a Bronze Star for his service. But Timothy liked to embellish his service. He was posted to the 7th Special Forces Group stationed at Fort Bragg at a time, so he would like to tell people that he was actually a commando, when in actual reality he was a property book inspector. So what he really had to do in the army was just make sure all the supplies had been replaced if they were damaged or lost, and that everything was checked and balanced. So if something was loaned out to somebody, it would come back and it would go back in place. That was his job. He wasn't a commando. In the bed of the pickup truck was a rolled up blanket. Now, police could see that whatever was in that blanket was quite big. It wasn't big enough to be a deer or game that maybe Timothy here had been out hunting and shot. It wasn't that big, but whatever it was big enough to concern them. As detectives started unwrapping the blanket, they discovered a human leg. Now, this human leg would be connected to the body of somebody that is going to turn this whole investigation upside down on its head. In fact, the Department of Defense, some people would say, ran a huge cover-up to make sure that the general public didn't know just how bad things had gotten on some US bases. Now, with Timothy Dumas having to embellish his service, claiming to be a commando in the Special Forces, the leg connected to the man in the bed of the truck, he didn't have to inflate his military service, not one bit. You see, the man was 37-year-old William Lavigne II, better known as Billy. And Billy was a master sergeant in the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, better known as Delta Force, a selective clandestine task force where only the best of the best are considered for it. And a lot of the commandos that are asked to go and try out for it don't even make it. That is how hard it is to become a Delta Force operator. And Billy was trained in sabotage, demolition, hostage rescue, tactical driving, and spycraft like lockpicking and living under an assumed identity. He's like Jason Bourne. His weapons and hand-to-hand combat skills are just off the charts. Like, this dude is was like the elite, man. Detectives can see that Billy had been shot multiple times in the chest, and he's only wearing a pair of small army running shorts and nothing else. So detectives determined that he must have been murdered in his sleep, because who can go toe-to-toe with this guy? Like, not a lot of people in the world would be able to go toe-to-toe with this man. There's just no way. Police would determine that the Chevy truck also belonged to Billy. So things are starting to become pretty obvious to detectives and the military criminal investigation division guys that were there as well, that Billy must have been killed somewhere else and transported out there, and Timothy Dumas was killed right there on the spot. So we've got two different murders taking place at two different times. So they know there must be at least one other person. Like, somebody else has to be involved. Timothy clearly did not kill himself. Now, detectives are left with the task of trying to work out how Billy, this Delta Force operator, Jason Bourne type character, even knows Timothy Dumas. And this is going to be very difficult, because you can only imagine that Billy's military record, which they're going to have to go through, would just be heavily blacked out, you know, like in the movies where there's just all that blackout over the writing, so you can't see what he does because he's like totally into some like real black ops type stuff. Like, that's what they're left to deal with. They've got to try and work out, how does Billy know Timothy? I mean, not even the criminal investigation division with the army are going to be able to see all of Billy's records. Like, this is going to be tough. William Lavigne joined the army directly out of high school in February of 2001. Now, the reason he joined is because he wanted to get free corrective eye surgery, and he also wanted to buy a cool dirt bike because he was like a country guy. Now, after 9/11 happened, Billy was like, man, I could see myself having a career doing this. So by 2006, he tries out for the Green Beret Commandos, and he makes it. From here, Billy is deployed like every single year. He's going to Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq. He's going everywhere. And by 2012, Delta Force Command go up to Billy and they say, hey, would you like to try out for Delta Force? And he's like, yeah. So Billy goes and does the Q course, which apparently is the Delta Force course that is super hard, and he passes. Now, given the nature of Delta Force and the work they actually do, it's top secret. They are the Black Ops division of the United States military, often going into countries without authorization, undetected, to clean up some bureaucratic mess that the politicians had left behind. And whether it was taking out a target or kidnapping someone for Guantanamo Bay or helping rebels overthrow a government, the members of Delta Force were the dudes for the job. It would be in 2012, just after Billy had finished his Q course to become a Delta Force member, when he would meet Mark Leshikar. Mark was 2 years younger than Billy, but he was also a country boy, so these two became best friends like straight away. Both of them were tall. I mean, Mark was like 6'4", and they're both special forces operators. So over the years, both men would be deployed to different hotspots all around the world. In 2017, Mark would suffer a traumatic brain injury after an IED exploded in Tajikistan while he was traveling in a Humvee. When he got back to the States, he would be prescribed tramadol for the pain, which is a very addictive opioid. The prescribing of opioids to Tier 1 soldiers like Mark and Billy is pretty common due to the nature of their job. The guys would suffer injuries during training or on deployments, and TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, were very common due to the fact that they were always around explosives, and whether it was them conducting a raid on a place where they're detonating the door and it's blowing out, or they're calling in an airstrike or an IED like what happened to Mark, like the brain basically smacks against the skull, and that's how you get a TBI. So some of these guys would get like, you know, dozens of TBIs on a single deployment. Now, from here, Mark would confide in his mother, Tammy, about the drug use that was happening around the Special Forces guys. He would even tell his mother that, you know, while we're on deployment, we're doing lines of coke so we can stay up all night on these missions, because his mother and his wife, Laura, are starting to notice that Mark is using a lot more drugs around the house. So this was kind of like his way of like justifying, like, everybody's doing it, man. Now, by 2018, Mark and Billy both have daughters. And they're both roughly the same age. Billy's divorced, and Mark would marry a paralegal woman named Laura. Mark also had a sister named Nicole who lived nearby. She had married a naval submariner, one of those dudes that goes into submarines. So she lived nearby at the same time. It was during these years that Laura and Nicole would disclose to a Rolling Stones reporter named Seth Harp just how rampant and widespread illicit drug use was amongst the Special Forces guys. They would tell the reporter, yeah, we were doing lines of coke with these guys all the time, and we knew like so-and-so was Delta Force, that guy over there was a Green Beret, they were partying with these people. A house full of commandos, crazy. But for Mark and Billy, their descent into drug use and alcohol abuse just kept spiraling. Often while they were wasted, they would tell some war stories, and Billy wasn't one to really talk or brag about it, so when he ever did mention these things, people listened. And he would tell Laura, Mark's wife, of a time when he was deployed overseas and he killed a child soldier who had an AK-47, and it was something that he struggled to live with. He would also tell them of another time when he allowed his service dog to eat the brains of a deceased enemy soldier whose skull had been blown apart. These were things that Billy struggled to live with, and Mark himself would tell his wife and sister that he had killed many, many people, and he too was struggling with it. He felt like he was a bad person for doing these things. And although Mark and Billy were the best of friends, they were very different personality-wise. Mark was very boisterous, and Billy was more introverted, and politically they couldn't be different. Mark would often say how the United States should just nuke the Middle East and just be done with it, and Billy would be like, no, that they've just got a different society, like who are we to judge? They should be free to live how they want to live. And he really did not believe in the war at this point. And this would be communicated to the Rolling Stones reporter Seth by not only Laura but Mark's sister Nicole. She would, because she's a spiritual healer, she's like a life coach, and she would tell the reporter how Billy was just completely different to any other Special Forces operator she had met. Like, he was just more caring and deeper inside. But she would say that when he started drinking, his eyes would glaze over and it would be almost like he was looking through you. War had clearly taken a very heavy toll on Billy and Mark. And given the fact that since 2014, the United States had left these war zones, or tried to appear that they had left the war zones, a lot of the fighting was then pushed onto the Special Forces operators. So these guys were constantly going into combat in different parts of the world. And these top secret missions were run by the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC, which has an estimated budget of over $2 million, but nobody's sure because JSOC and the government won't tell anybody how much money they're actually putting into these Black Op operations. I've played Call of Duty Black Ops, so I know what I'm talking about. It would be a retired Navy SEAL colonel who would whistleblow to the media and tell them that there's only about 250 dudes that are in JSOC, that work in JSOC. So that's a lot of heavy lifting for only 250 blokes to be getting deployed to these hotspots all around the world at a moment's notice. But for Mark and Billy, things would come to a head in March of 2018. Mark and his wife Laura Leshikar would plan a one-week vacation over in Florida to take their daughter, who had just turned 5 years old, to Disneyland. I can't remember which is which. I'm pretty certain it's Disneyland. I think Disney World's over in LA. It's in Florida. And being that Billy is the godfather to Mark's daughter, he is invited. So he brings his own child along, his own daughter, who is roughly the same age, and they all drive over to Florida. They take 2 cars for this trip, but they drive over to Florida. It was while he in the rental house that Laura would later tell the Rolling Stones reporter Seth that the entire time Mark and Billy were just doing drugs and drinking. And at the end of the stay, all of them started heading back to North Carolina, but Laura wanted to take her sister to the airport, so she left Mark and Billy to drive the 2 girls back to North Carolina, which was about an 8-hour drive. It was during the trip when Laura would get a text message from Billy, and Billy was saying that her husband Mark was super paranoid, acting out of sorts. He thought people were following them, and he was just letting her know that she should call him. So she calls him and FaceTimes him, and he's just acting normal. So Laura's like, they must be playing a practical joke on me, because this is something they would do a lot, is they'd play practical jokes. So she just sort of like passed it off as that and just sort of left it alone. Now, at this stage, Billy and Mark are driving back to Billy's house. They decide to go to Billy's house and they arrive around 4 p.m. It is when they arrive that things get out of hand really quickly. Mark jumps out of the car and he's got a screwdriver and he pops the hood and he starts trying to dismantle the engine. And the engine is still really hot from this 8-hour drive that they just completed coming back from Florida. And Billy is like, what are you doing? Like, why are you trying to pull apart my car? Because it's Billy's car. At the same time, it's Billy's car and Mark's there trying to rip things out of the engine. So Billy has to try and restrain Mark at this point, and Mark is a huge guy. He's like 6'4", so they get into a wrestling match on the driveway. And while this is happening, both their little daughters are watching this, and they're screaming, "Daddy, like, would you just stop?" And at some point, Billy lets him go, grabs the two little girls, and he races inside, locking the door behind him and locking Mark outside. Now, from here, Mark is desperately trying to get into the house, and as he keeps trying to get in and he's telling Billy, open the door, he's getting more angry, and eventually his daughter, his 5-year-old daughter, they just celebrated the birthday for, she goes and lets her dad in. Upon opening the door, Mark sees Billy and he is enraged and he starts racing towards Billy. But Billy, at this point, he has gone and got his firearm. As Mark is closing in on him, Billy raises it up and he just starts shooting right in front of Mark's daughter. She sees the whole thing go down, and she later tells people that it looked like Daddy was dancing in midair and then he hit the ground and rolled over, and Uncle Billy just kept firing. He just kept firing into my dad. And you got to sort of remember that Billy is a tier 1 operator. So if he sees a threat that he needs to neutralize, he's just going to keep firing until that person's dead, essentially. So Mark is now dead on the floor and Billy calls the cops. The Cumberland County Sheriff's deputies arrive to the scene and they start questioning Billy and they find out who he is. They take him downtown, but they never charge him. He doesn't spend a night in jail, and they rule it as a justifiable homicide because they basically ruled it as self-defense. Billy's statement to them was that Mark had come at him with a screwdriver threatening to kill him, but there was no screwdriver beside the body. The only screwdriver that was there was out the front next to the car when Mark was trying to like pull bits of it apart. So the screwdriver that Billy claimed Mark had to attack him, he didn't actually have. But police would just determine it as a justifiable homicide. And this is something you're going to see a lot, that with these top tier operators around North Carolina, they tend to escape any sort of legal accountability a lot of the times. You know, the United States government spends like over $1 million training just one of these guys. So I think they're just like, you know, thanks for your service. Mark Leshikar's toxicology report during his autopsy revealed the fact that he had large quantities of Valium, Tramadol, MDMA, and cocaine in his system. So that does confirm Laura's story to the Rolling Stones reporter, that the pair were doing drugs the entire time. Now, from here, Billy would have further run-ins with law enforcement. You've got to remember, this is 2018. He is going to be found dead himself in just 2 years. Now, by 2020, the lockdown madness is spreading all over the world. William Billy Lavigne II was spiraling out of control. His life with drugs is just going down the drain at this point. Like, he's getting super bad with it. His father, Billy Sr., would meet up with him on the 4th of July to celebrate America's Independence Day, and he just noticed his son he wasn't doing all right. He was haunted by the death of his friend Mark, and as soon as the fireworks started going off, he freaked out and he's like, I've got to get out of here, because he started seeing really bad things. This is a guy that had a lot of trauma from combat, and he's still an active service member. I mean, at this point, Billy is waiting a couple of months because he's going to be at that point where he can retire, because he would have served 20 years. So he's still an active service member at this point. And other people would say that during this time, Billy, he was always on drugs. Like, he was always under the influence of something, whether it was alcohol or illicit drugs. Like, he was always on something. After the 4th of July and 2 months later, police would be called to Billy's house because somebody had died of a heroin overdose. And it was while inside that the police found copious amounts of drugs everywhere. They found a digital scale and multiple firearms, and there was also a guy who had escaped the authorities. So he was a wanted fugitive at this point. So the cops arrested everyone down there. including Billy this time. And Billy would be indicted on 2 felony charges, and one of those charges was maintaining a dwelling to manufacture a controlled substance. So they believe with the scales and the amount of drugs that were there that this may have been like a meth lab. But however, Uncle Sam would come to the rescue, and other people in the house would put their hand up and say, no, that was my drugs, they were my scales, and Billy would be let go without charge. It was also during this time that Timothy Dumas, he was the black man found the same time as Billy by the hunter, it was at this time that he's being charged with many offenses himself around this 2020 period. And it's everything from like communicating threats to impersonating law enforcement to doing break-in enters. He even hit a woman at a McDonald's with a bag of food. And his last charge before his death were prostitution offenses. So on December 1st, 2020, when they found both men's dead bodies in the woods of Fort Bragg, they were never able to directly link Timothy and Billy together. They just couldn't make those connections. That was until August 1st of 2023, so almost 3 years later. A man named Kenneth Maurice Quick Jr., a North Carolina resident who was currently serving a 57-month stretch for unrelated offences, was indicted on the murders of both William Billy Lavigne II and Timothy Dumas. It's alleged that Kenneth had killed Billy at a different location and was transporting his body to the woods with the help of Timothy Dumas. You see, Kenneth and Timothy were both drug dealers. And it's while out bush Kenny thinks, you know what, I may as well take out the competition, and he kills Tim right then and there. The motive for Billy's murder has yet to be revealed, because this is, again, it's in court, and when things are in court, Kenneth Maurice Quick Jr. is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the motive for Kenneth killing Billy has yet to be revealed, or if they even know what it was. Maybe Billy was moving in on his territory and wanted to sell drugs himself, hence the scales that he had at his house, or maybe he owed him money. They haven't revealed that just yet, so keep your ear to the ground. And the motive for Kenneth killing Timothy, I think it's pretty obvious that he was trying to eliminate a drug rival. That's more than likely what it was. So this is why the police could never determine a direct link between Billy and Timothy, is because there just wasn't one there. Timothy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it did open up a can of worms into the allegations of rampant drug use amongst the United States Special Forces community. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. We expect these men to go into combat to protect our freedoms, seeing and doing horrific things, but yet sort of just expect them to be able to shake it off afterwards. It's not really fair, I guess. But that's the story of a case that is still unfolding, and I will keep you guys up to date with the outcome of that. And that closes the chapter on Mark Leshikar, William Lavigne II, and Timothy Dumas. Thank you for your service. May you rest in peace. And as always, stay safe out there in internet land.